双语音标领航，注音阅读启蒙，叶兴阳有声读物。
History of the Impeachment of Andrew Johnson, President of the United States, by Edmund G. Ross. Preface. Little is now known to the general public of the history of the attempt to remove President Andrew Johnson in 1868, on his impeachment by the House of Representatives and trial by the Senate for alleged high crimes and misdemeanors in office, or of the causes that led to it. Yet it was one of the most important and critical events, involving possibly the gravest consequences in the entire history of the country. The constitutional power to impeach and remove the president had lain dormant since the organization of the government, and apparently had never been thought of as a means for the satisfaction of political enmities or for the punishment of alleged executive misdemeanors, even in the many heated controversies between the president and Congress that had theretofore arisen. Nor would any attempt at impeachment have been made at that time, but for the great numerical disparity then existing between the respective representatives in Congress of the two political parties of the country. One half the members of that Congress, both House and Senate, are now dead, and with them have also gone substantially the same proportion of the people at large. But many of the actors therein who have passed away lived long enough to see, and were candid enough to admit, that the failure of the impeachment had brought no harm to the country, while the general judgment practically of all has come to be that a grave and threatening danger was thereby averted. A new generation is now in control of public affairs, and the destinies of the nation have fallen to new hands. New issues have developed and will continue to develop from time to time, and new dangers will arise, with increasing numbers and changing conditions, demanding in their turn the same careful scrutiny, wisdom and patriotism in adjustment. But the principles that underlie and constitute the basis of our political organism are and will remain the same, and will never cease to demand constant vigilance for their perpetuation as the rock of safety upon which our federative system is founded. To those who in the study of the country's past seek a broader and higher conception of the duties of American citizenship, the facts pertaining to the controversy between the executive and Congress as to the restoration and preservation of the Union, set out in the following pages, will be interesting and instructive. No one is better fitted than the author of this volume to discuss the period of Reconstruction in which, as a member of the Federal Senate, he played so potent and patriotic a part, and it is a pleasure to find that he has discharged his task with so much ability and care. But it is profoundly hoped that no coming generation will be called upon to utilize the experiences of the past in facing in their day, in field or forum, the dangers of disruption and anarchy, mortal strife and desolation, between those of one race, and blood, and nationality, that marked the history of America 30 years ago. David B. Hill. Chapter 1. The Problem of Reconstruction. Mr. Lincoln's Plan. The close of the War of the Rebellion, in 1865, found the country confronted by a civil problem quite as grave as the contest of arms that had been composed. It was that of Reconstruction, or the restoration of the states lately in revolt, to their constitutional relations to the Union. The country had just emerged from a gigantic struggle of physical force of 4 years' duration between the two great northern and southern sections. That struggle had been from its inception to its close a continuing exhibition, on both sides, of stubborn devotion to a cause, and its annals had been crowned with illustrations of the grandest race and personal courage the history of the world records. Out of a population of 30 million people, 4 million men were under arms, from first to last, and sums of money quite beyond the limit of ordinary comprehension were expended in its prosecution. There was bloodshed without stint. Both sides to the conflict fought for an idea, on the one side for so-called state rights and local self-government, on the other for national autonomy as the surest guarantee of all rights, personal, local, and general, the institution of Negro slavery, the basis of the productive industries of the states of the South, which had from the organization of the government been a source of friction between the slaveholding and non-slaveholding sections, and was in fact the underlying and potent cause of the war, went under in the strife and was by national edict forever prohibited, the struggle being ended by the exhaustion of the insurgents. Two conspicuous problems demanding immediate solution were developed: the status of the now ex-slaves, or freedmen, and the methods to be adopted for the rehabilitation of the revolted states, including the status of the revolted states themselves. The sword had declared that they had no constitutional power to withdraw from the Union, and the result demonstrated that they had not the physical power, and therefore that they were in the anomalous condition of states, although not states technically in the Union, and hence properly subject to the jurisdiction of the general government, and bound by its judgment in any measures to be instituted by it for their future restoration to their former condition of co-equal states. The now ex-slaves had been liberated, not with the consent of their former owners, but by the power of the conqueror as a war measure, who not unnaturally insisted upon the right to declare absolutely the future status of these persons without consultation with, or in any way, by the intervention of their late owners. The majority of the gentlemen in Congress representing the northern states demanded the instant and complete enfranchisement of these persons, as the natural and logical sequence of their enfreedment. The people of the late slave states, as was to have been foreseen, and not without reason, objected, especially where, as was the case in many localities, the late slaves largely outnumbered the people of the white race. And it is apparent from subsequent developments that they had the sympathy of President Lincoln, at least so far as to refuse his sanction to the earlier action of Congress relative to restoration. To add to the gravity of the situation and of the problem of Reconstruction, the people of the states lately in rebellion were disfranchised in a mass, regardless of the fact that many of them refused to sanction the rebellion only so far as was necessary to their personal safety. It was insisted by the dominant element of the party in control of Congress that these states were dead as political entities, having committed political suicide, and their people without rights or the protection of law, as malcontents. It is of record that Mr. Lincoln objected to this doctrine, and to all propositions that contemplated the treatment of the late rebellious states simply as conquered provinces, and their people as having forfeited all rights under a common government, and under the laws of nations entitled to no concessions, or even to consideration, in any proposed measures of restoration. That he had no sympathy with that theory is evidenced by the plan of restoration he attempted to establish in Louisiana. It was at this point that differences arose between Mr. Lincoln and his party in Congress, which became more or less acute prior to his death, and continued between Congress and Mr. Johnson on his attempt to carry out Mr. Lincoln's plans for restoration. The cessation of hostilities in the field thus developed a politico-economic problem which had never before confronted any nation in such magnitude and gravity. The situation was at once novel, unprecedented, and in more senses than one, alarming. Without its due and timely solution, there was danger of still farther disturbance of a far different and more alarming character than that of arms but lately ceased, and of a vastly more insidious and dangerous complexion. The war had been fought in the open. The record of the more than 2,000 field and naval engagements that had marked its progress, and the march of the Union armies to success, were heralded day by day to every household, and all could forecast its trend and its results. But the controversy now developed was insidious. Its influences, its weapons, its designs, and its possible end were in a measure hidden from the public. Public opinion was divided, and its results, for good or ill, problematical. The wisest political sagacity and the broadest statesmanship possible were needed, and in their application no time was to be lost. In his annual message to Congress, December 8, 1863, Mr. Lincoln had to a considerable extent outlined his plan of Reconstruction, principally by a recital of what he had already done in that direction. That part of his message pertinent to this connection is reproduced here to illustrate the broad, humane, national and patriotic purpose that actuated him, quite as well as his lack of sympathy with the extreme partisan aims and methods that characterized the measures afterward adopted by Congress in opposition to his well-known wishes and views. And, also, as an important incident to the history of that controversy and of the time, and its bearing upon the frictions that followed between Congress and Mr. Lincoln's successor on that subject. Mr. Lincoln said, "When Congress assembled a year ago, the war had already lasted 20 months, and there had been many conflicts on both land and sea, with varying results. The rebellion had been pressed back into reduced limits, yet the tone of public feeling and opinion, at home and abroad, was not satisfactory. With other signs, the popular elections, then just passed, indicated uneasiness among ourselves, while, amid much that was cold and menacing, the kindest words coming from Europe were uttered in accents of pity that we were too blind to surrender a hopeless cause. Our commerce was suffering greatly by a few armed vessels built upon and furnished from foreign shores, and we were threatened with such additions from the same quarter as would sweep our trade from the sea and raise our blockade. We had failed to elicit from European governments anything hopeful upon this subject. The preliminary Emancipation Proclamation, issued in September, was running its assigned period to the beginning of the new year. A month later, that final proclamation came, including the announcement that colored men of suitable condition would be received into the Army service. The policy of emancipation, and of employing black soldiers, gave to the future a new aspect, about which hope and fear and doubt contended in uncertain conflict. According to our political system, as a matter of civil administration, the general government had no lawful power to effect emancipation in any state, and for a long time it had been hoped that the rebellion could be suppressed without resorting to it as a military measure. It was all the while deemed possible that the necessity for it might come, and that, if it should, the crisis of the contest would then be presented. It came, and, as was anticipated, was followed by dark and doubtful days. 11 months have now passed, and we are permitted to take another review. The rebel borders are pressed still further back, and, by the complete opening of the Mississippi, the country dominated by the rebellion is divided into distinct parts, with no practical communication between them. Tennessee and Arkansas have been substantially cleared of insurgent control, and influential citizens in each, owners of slaves and advocates of slavery at the beginning of the rebellion, now declare openly for emancipation in their respective states. Of those states not included in the Emancipation Proclamation, Maryland and Missouri, neither of which 3 years ago would tolerate any restraint upon the extension of slavery into the new territories, only dispute now as to the best mode of removing it within their own limits. Of those who were slaves at the beginning of the rebellion, full 100,000 are now in the United States military service, about 1/2 of which number actually bear arms in the ranks, thus giving the double advantage of taking so much labor from the insurgent cause, and supplying the places which must otherwise be filled with so many white men. So far as tested, it is difficult to say they are not as good soldiers as any. No servile insurrection, or tendency to violence or cruelty, has marked the measure of emancipation and arming the blacks. Those measures have been discussed in foreign countries, and contemporary with such discussion the tone of sentiment there is much improved. At home the same measures have been fully discussed, and supported, criticized, and denounced, and the annual elections following are highly encouraging to those whose official duty it is to bear the country through this great trial. Thus we have the new reckoning. The crisis which threatened to divide the friends of the Union is past. Looking now to the present and future, and with reference to a resumption of national authority within the states wherein that authority has been suspended, I have thought fit to issue a proclamation, a copy of which is herewith transmitted. On examination of this proclamation, it will appear, as is believed, that nothing is attempted beyond what is amply justified by the Constitution. True, the form of an oath is given, but no man is coerced to take it. The man is only promised a pardon in case he voluntarily takes the oath. The Constitution authorizes the executive to grant or withhold the pardon at his own absolute discretion, and this includes the power to grant on terms, as is fully established by judicial and other authorities. It is also proffered that, if in any of the states named a state government shall be, in the mode prescribed, set up, such government shall be recognized and guaranteed by the United States, and that under it the state shall, on the constitutional conditions, be protected against invasion and domestic violence. The constitutional obligation of the United States to guarantee to every state in the Union a republican form of government, and to protect the state, in the cases stated, is explicit and full. But why tender the benefits of this provision only to a state government set up in this particular way? This section contemplates a case wherein the element within a state favorable to a republican government in the Union may be too feeble for an opposite and hostile external to, or even within the state, and such are precisely the cases with which we are dealing. Any attempt to guarantee and protect a revived state government, constituted in whole, or in preponderating part, from the very element against whose hostility it is to be protected, is simply absurd. There must be a test by which to separate the opposing elements, so as to build only from the sound, and that test is a sufficiently liberal one which accepts as sound whoever will make a sworn recantation of his former unsoundness. But if it be proper to require, as a test of admission to the political body, an oath of allegiance to the Constitution of the United States, and to the Union under it, why also to the laws and proclamation in regard to slavery. Those laws and proclamations were enacted and put forth for the purpose of aiding in the suppression of the rebellion. To give them their fullest effect, there had to be a pledge for their maintenance. In my judgment they have aided, and will further aid, the cause for which they were intended. To now abandon them would be not only to relinquish a lever of power, but would also be a cruel and an astounding breach of faith. I may add at this point that while I remain in my present position, I shall not attempt to retract or modify the Emancipation Proclamation, nor shall I return to slavery any person who is free by the terms of the proclamation, or by any of the acts of Congress. For these and other reasons it is thought best that support of these measures shall be included in the oath, and it is believed the executive may lawfully claim it in return for pardon and restoration of forfeited rights, when he has clear constitutional power to withhold altogether or grant upon terms which he shall deem wisest for the public interest. It should be observed, also, that this part of the oath is subject to the modifying and abrogating power of legislation and supreme judicial decision. The proposed acquiescence of the national executive in any reasonable temporary state arrangement for the freed people is made with the view of possibly modifying the confusion and destitution which must, at best, attend all classes by a total revolution of labor throughout whole states. It is hoped that the already deeply afflicted people of those states may be somewhat more ready to give up the cause of their affliction, if, to this extent, this vital matter be left to themselves, while no power of the national executive to prevent an abuse is abridged by the proposition. The suggestion in the proclamation as to maintaining the political framework of those states on what is called Reconstruction is made in the hope that it may do good without danger of harm. It will save labor and avoid great confusion. But why any proclamation on this subject? This question is beset with the conflicting views that the step might be delayed too long or taken too soon. In some states the elements for resumption seem ready for action, but remain inactive apparently for want of a rallying point. Why shall A adopt the plan of B, rather than B that of A? And if A and B should agree, how can they know but that the general government here will reject their plan? By the proclamation a plan is presented which may be accepted by them as a rallying point, and which they may be assured in advance will not be rejected here. This may bring them to act sooner than they otherwise would. The objection to a premature presentation of a plan by the national executive consists in the danger of committals on points which could be more safely left to further developments. Care has been taken to so shape the document as to avoid embarrassment from this source, saying that, on certain terms, certain classes will be pardoned, with rights restored. It is not said that other classes on other terms will never be included. saying that Reconstruction will be accepted if presented in a specified way. It is not saying it will not be accepted in any other way. The movements, by state action, for emancipation in several of the states not included in the Emancipation Proclamation, are matters of profound gratulation, and while I do not repeat in detail what I have heretofore so earnestly urged upon this subject, my general views and feelings remain unchanged, and I trust that Congress will omit no fair opportunity of aiding these important steps to a great consummation. In the midst of other cares, however important, we must not lose sight of the fact that the war power is still our main reliance. To that power alone can we look, for a time, to give confidence to the people in the contested regions that the insurgent power will not again overrun them. Until that confidence shall be established, little can be done anywhere for what is called Reconstruction. Hence, our chiefest care must still be directed to the Army and Navy, who have thus far borne their hardest part nobly and well. And it may be esteemed fortunate that in giving the greatest efficiency to these indispensable arms, we do also honorably recognize the gallant men, from commander to sentinel, who compose them, to whom, more than to others, the world must stand indebted for the home of freedom disenthralled, regenerated, enlarged, and perpetuated. Abraham Lincoln, December 8, 1863. The following is the proclamation of amnesty and Reconstruction referred to in the foregoing message, and further illustrates Mr. Lincoln's plan for the restoration of the Union. Proclamation of Amnesty and Reconstruction. By the President on the United States of America. Whereas, in and by the Constitution of the United States, it is provided that the President shall have the power to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States, except in cases of impeachment, and, whereas, a rebellion now exists whereby the loyal state governments of several states have for a long time been subverted, and many persons have committed, and are guilty of treason against the United States, and, whereas, with reference to said rebellion and treason, laws have been enacted by Congress, declaring forfeitures and confiscations of property and liberation of slaves, all upon terms and conditions therein stated, and also declaring that the President was thereby authorized at any time thereafter, by proclamation, to extend to persons who may have participated in the existing rebellion, in any state or part thereof, pardon and amnesty, with such exceptions and at such times and on such conditions as he may deem expedient for the public welfare. And, whereas, the Congressional Declaration for Limited and Conditional Pardon accords with well-established judicial exposition of the pardoning power. And, whereas, with reference to said rebellion, the President of the United States has issued several proclamations, with provisions in regard to the liberation of slaves. And, whereas, it is now desired by some persons heretofore engaged in said rebellion to resume their allegiance to the United States, and to re-inaugurate loyal state governments within and for their respective states. Therefore, I, Abraham Lincoln, President of the United States, do proclaim, declare, and make known to all persons who have, directly or by implication, participated in the existing rebellion, except as hereinafter accepted, that a full pardon is hereby granted to them and each of them, with restoration of all rights of property, except as to slaves and in property cases where rights of third parties shall have intervened, and upon the condition that every such person shall take and subscribe an oath, and thenceforward keep and maintain said oath inviolate, and which oath shall be registered for permanent preservation, and shall be of the tenor and effect following, to wit, I do solemnly swear, in presence of Almighty God, that I will henceforth faithfully support, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States, and the Union of the States thereunder, and that I will, in like manner, abide by and faithfully support all acts of Congress passed during the existing rebellion with reference to slaves, so long and so far as not repealed, modified or held void by Congress, or by the decision of the Supreme Court, and that I will, in like manner, abide by and faithfully support all proclamations of the President made during the existing rebellion having reference to slaves, so long and so far as not modified or declared void by decision of the Supreme Court. So help me God. The persons exempted from the benefits of the foregoing provisions are all who are, or shall have been, civil or diplomatic officers or agents of the so-called Confederate government, all who have left judicial stations under the United States to aid the rebellion, all who are or shall have been military or naval officers of said so-called Confederate government above the rank of colonel in the Army or lieutenant in the Navy, all who have left seats in the United States Congress to aid the rebellion, all who resigned commissions in the Army or Navy of the United States and afterward aided the rebellion, and all who have engaged in any way in treating colored persons, or white persons in charge of such, otherwise than lawfully as prisoners of war, and which persons may have been found in the United States service as soldiers, seamen, or in any capacity. And I do further proclaim, declare, and make known that whenever, in any of the states of Arkansas, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, South Carolina, and North Carolina, a number of persons, not less than 1/10 in number of the votes cast in such state at the presidential election of the year of our Lord 1860, each having taken the oath aforesaid, and not having since violated it, and being a qualified voter by the election laws of the state existing immediately before the so-called Act of Secession, and excluding all others, shall re-establish a state government which shall be republican, and in no wise contravening said oath. Such shall be recognized as the true government of the state, and the state shall receive thereunder the benefits of the constitutional provision which declares that the United States shall guarantee to every state in this union a republican form of government, and shall protect each of them against invasion, and, on the application of the legislature, or the executive when the legislature cannot be convened, against domestic violence. And I do further proclaim, declare, and make known that any provision which may be adopted by such state government in relation to the freed people of such state, which shall recognize and declare their permanent freedom, provide for their education, and which may yet be consistent as a temporary arrangement with their present condition as a laboring, landless, and homeless class, will not be objected to by the national executive, and it is suggested as not improper that, in constructing a loyal state government in any state, the name of the state, the boundary, the subdivisions, the Constitution, and the general code of laws, as before the rebellion, be maintained, subject only to the modifications made necessary by the conditions hereinbefore stated, and such others, if any, not contravening said conditions, and which may be deemed expedient by those framing the new state government. To avoid misunderstanding, it may be proper to say that whether members sent to Congress from any state shall be admitted to seats, constitutionally rests exclusively with the respective houses, and not to any extent with the executive, and still further, that this proclamation is intended to present to the people of the states wherein the national authority has been suspended, and loyal state governments have been subverted, a mode in and by which the national authority and loyal state governments may be re-established within said states, or in any of them, and while the mode presented is the best the executive can suggest, with his present impressions, it must not be understood that no other possible mode would be acceptable. Given under my hand at the city of Washington, the 8th day of December, in the year of our Lord 1863, and of the independence of the United States of America, the 88th, L.S.